Council for World Mission was created in 1977 after the Singapore Conference of 1975, which is really important, really important. So kind of a direct link to the Council for World Mission is the London Missionary Society, founded in 1795. Theoretically, it did have a really good foundation. The fundamental principle was really egalitarian. If you look at it closely, it's very congregational in nature, but we can also talk about it being ecumenical. That's another conversation that Janet would like to say is ecumenical, but really it's quite congregational. That they didn't want to be just another missionary society, they wanted to be a missionary society for everybody. And that legacy was a good starting point, but obviously when we get into the mission field, missionaries behaved more like bishops. They couldn't really disengage the gospel from their own culture. Colonialism kind of comes alongside, it gets very complicated, and this is why I'm starting with the Singapore Conference, because it's only one PhD, I can't go into all of that. So the reality was, the Council for World Mission, kind of in the 60s, 1966, Janet will correct me, became the Congregational Council for World Mission, when the Congregational Union of England and Wales realized that the church, influenced by Hendrik Kramer, who I talked about in the introduction, the church needed to be the model for mission. The church needed to do the mission, not the voluntary society connected to the church that was doing mission. So the Congregational Union became the Congregational Church, and the Congregational Church developed the Congregational Council for World Mission, which brought together the constituent churches, so all the Western congregational churches. So we had the Congregational Union of England and Wales, we had the Union of Welsh Independence at this point, maybe, yes, and some from Australia and New Zealand were big players too. And then you had the associate churches, which were all the London Missionary Society churches in the global south. But we still have a two-way hierarchy here. We have the mission senders, which is the Western congregational churches, and the mission receivers, which were the majority world / third world, but we don't like that terminology anymore, churches. And then obviously that's a problem. So in 1975, Bernard Thorogood decided that we needed to get both the churches together to talk about what the future of this Council for World Mission could look like. So they got together, and the history, which is recorded in Gales of Change by Bernard Thorogood and Robert Latham, has a really important chapter in that too. Written by the white leaders, the Western leaders and the missionaries, talks about how a missionary from South Africa talked about the Indigenous church leaders' ability and that they too could be equal partners. But when we look at the actual papers, that's not being recorded too accurately. And it was the Indigenous church leaders who stood up and said, no, we want to contribute as equals. We can financially contribute to this council. We want to be responsible for our own direction of mission. We want to send our own missionaries to the West. And this completely changed the structure of CCWM at this point. And it became this idea of an egalitarian missionary society, where the mission was a partnership in mission, but the mission was done by each local church in their own context. And that was the important part. Now, later on, we realized that that's a bit problematic. Putting lots of people on the same table doesn't mean that the power gets shared. So there needed to be a little bit more radicalness. The Council for Missions theology is definitely radical now, and I love it, but it's very controversial. It's this idea that power is really important, and that our legacy of colonialism, of white hegemony, of patriarchy, of capitalism, of Western epistemology does not just dissolve by itself, and that there's a need to not only let majority world churches govern themselves, but also give them a platform for Western churches to listen, and to not take our view of the world for granted. Yeah, so that's sort of struggle there, and about how you really become an equal partner is a really big discussion in how we understand the Council for World Mission and many missionary societies today.